Hello and welcome to this Android Development tutorial brought to you by North Border Software. My name is Gary. In this tutorial we're going to look at how to grant permissions in Runtime for any particular application. This is a change really that was introduced in API 23 or Marshmallow. Prior to API 23, if a permission was needed, that would be recorded in the Android manifest file, and the user would have the option to not install the app if they didn't like that particular permission to be used. However, since API 23, we now have to prompt the user to allow a particular permission to be used in runtime. This is irrespective of what's in the Android manifest file. So this gives us a challenge as developers really as to how we handle this. First of all, we need to pop up a dialog box to actually request the permission, whether it's allowed or denied. What do we do then? If they denied permission, do we simply shut down the app, or do we disable the elements of the application which use that particular permission? We might want to think about some messaging for the user on the user interface to let them know why those permissions are actually needed in the first place. So this is a challenge. You may remember that if you looked at the location-based services tutorial which I gave, that was actually compiled against API 23, and within that was we had to get Android Studio to add some default code which was needed to get around an error, and this was really focused around the permissions, and it's something I said I would actually look at because I wasn't really satisfied with just allowing the default code, but it was appropriate at the time just to focus on location-based services. But this is a subject now I want to pick up on. What I'll do, I'll use the that particular project as a base to work with. So if you haven't seen the code or haven't got the code, that is available on the website. You can download the source, the Java and everything else, so you can actually got a good solid base to work with as well. Before we get into the coding though, let's just break out and have a little closer look at Android permissions. So not all permissions in the Android system need to be authorized in runtime. Some permissions are classed as normal, things like internet access or Wi-Fi status. These types of permissions don't give up the user's privacy or risk giving up the user's privacy. Dangerous permissions, however, those that are categorized as ones that can actually give out confidential data, so that may even be the camera, it certainly could be the phone or contacts, this sort of information. So this is all the dangerous permissions, they're the ones that need to be allowed or authorized in runtime. So this is how it's actually organized. You don't grant permission to individual permissions, but you grant permissions to the permission group. Here's a list of some of the dangerous permissions as categorized by the Android system. What you can do, if you want to just study these in more detail, then you can certainly just pause the video and just take a look at them. On the other page here, just to finish it off, are the last of the dangerous permissions, which is the phone and the SMS system. Now back to the programming. Okay, so you may remember or you may recall that when we tried to connect the Google API client to the Google Play location-based services, this particular callback method was called upon, and this is where we had to insert the default code which was generated by Android Studio. Effectively, what this is saying, this line of code here, is if the permission for the fine access has not been granted and the permission for the course location access has not been granted, then we need to do something, and this is where we need to prompt the user to request the permissions. So this is something I want to build on from here, and the first thing we need to do is actually pop up a dialog box which then prompts the user to allow or deny the permission. So we do this by typing the following. Okay, so what we need to do is type request, and it'll be permission. So looking for permissions. We've got quite a lot to type here now, so it'll be new We need to type string. This is actually defined on the website, so I'm really just copying the default code here. So there's kind of a string array here, so it'll be we need to type manifest, and it'll be dot permission. Now I'm going to put you can see here, this is where all the particular permissions are. Now what we can do, rather than handle the course and the find location separately, we can actually just go for the find location. If we grant permission to find location, the permissions for course location is implied as well. Remember, we prompt the user for permission groups, and the location permission group contains both the find and course location permissions. So we only need to worry about the find location. So just going to select that, and what we need to do now is we need to enter a defined constant, which I haven't actually done at the moment, but I'll just put it in for the moment, then we'll define that. Now it's an integer value. I could put any number in here, but we'll kind of put this at the top and declare it globally. So I'm going to call it permissions, my permissions request, something like find location. Okay, so that's going to throw an error out. So this will actually generate the dialog box. First of all, let's just deal with this particular issue here. So I'm going to just define a constant at the top. So it'll be, we'll call it private, and it'll be static final int, and just give it any old number. I'm going to give it 101. Now the reason we're doing that is you'll see later on there's a callback method that's called upon when we put a response into the dialog box. We may be in a situation where we're handling multiple permissions, so consequently we need to have a switch in case to work out what we need to do for each particular permission. So that's why that's defined there. We have total control of that number. I might just define a separate one just to kind of give an example as well. So let's just put this in. Let's say for sake of argument, this is if we were working with the course location, then we could just give this a number of 102, and that'll become kind of apparent later on. Okay, so let's go back here. We've still got an issue here. This can be resolved automatically, and this code only applies to API 28. So this is probably what we're going to be needed to add automatically. So I'm going to surround this with code to just make sure that it's only executed for API 28, and that takes care of that side of things. Okay, so that's going to request the permissions dialog box. Now we need to think about what happens when we request or deny permissions. What I want to do in this particular example is to kind of bypass the calls to the Google API client for the location-based data. So I'm actually going to set up another kind of Boolean variable at the top, which will just allow us to bypass things. So I'm just going to call it, it'll be, let's say, private Boolean. I'm going to call this permission is granted, and I'm going to set this equal to false in the first instance. because really I don't want the app to do anything until we change this to true, and then we'll start collecting location-based services. Right, so what we need to do, I mentioned there's a callback method. So what I'm going to do is just add this particular callback method now. So what we can do is just do a Control O, and it'll be on permission. That's on permission results. That's what I want to call upon here. So if I just double click on that, and then we've got the base elements here for the callback method. Okay, so if we just look up here now, this constant here is actually the request code. This is what's actually passed to the callback method on request permissions result. So what we're going to do is set up a switching case against that. So when this dialog box appears and I make a response, we're going to pass 101 to the callback method. So I'm going to set up a switching case really to handle what we do when we're dealing with location-based services. So it'll be simply switch, and it'll be request code. Okay, and just open the curly brackets there. So I need to set up a case, and it'll be case my permissions find location break. Now, just as an example, I'm not going to fill it in. We could set up another case here, which is for the course location, or it could be for contacts or anything else. But obviously, I'm not going to deal with this for this example. What I'll do is just put some comment in here. So do something for course location. Now I just need to focus on what we're doing here for the find location. So all I really want to do is put an if statement in here, which says if the permission is granted, we want to do something. If it's not, then do something else. So we could say granted results, and it'll be that because it's an array is equivalent to package manager dot permissions granted. Then we can open up the if here. So and all we need to do is just have an else here as well. So so this is permission granted, and this is what to do when permission is denied. Okay, so all I want to do when the permission is granted is actually change the Boolean switch to true. So it'll be permission is granted equals to true. Okay. What we need to do for the false is a couple of for the permissions denied is to make sure that is set to false, which is the default anyway. But also what I want to do is actually inform the user that we do need to have the permissions in place. So I'm going to set up just a toast, really, just to message the user that we need for this app to run. We do need to have the permissions granted. So it'd be toast make text get application context, and just a little message. This app requires location permissions to be granted, and we'll just make this a short one. It'll be toast dot length short, and finish it off with a dot show. Okay, so that's just a little message to the user that needs to be granted. We might want to put something in the layout as well, so I might just permanently set the set text in layout to reflect the fact that the permission has been denied. So we can say something like latitude text dot set text, and we'll make it something like say latitude permission not set, or permission not granted, and we'll do a similar thing for the longitude. Just change this to longitude. Okay. So that's all we'll need to do for that handling of that particular case. This one here is just an example if we've got multiple permissions to reflect to deal with. Okay, so what we need to do now is just work through the methods just work through the process of actually when we actually call pause and resume the location-based services. So we need to focus on the start, resume, pause and stop methods. So first of all, I don't want to do anything with the onStart method because this is where we're calling the connect. We want the services to try and connect because we don't prompt the user to grant permissions until the onConnected callback is made. So we need to allow this to go through. Always try and connect and then deal with the permissions. Now for the onResume, that's called after onStart. Yeah, what we need to do is just make sure we only request location updates if the permission's actually being granted. So the way we do that is we could just put a basic if statement in here. So say if permission is granted, we can just actually just request those particular updates. So basically, if the permission is granted, then we'll start the location updates. If not, we'll just ignore this itself. So on the on pause, it's a similar thing. What we need to do is just say if permissions is granted, we'll actually just temporarily suspend the particular updates. I've not put a bracket in here because it's just one line of code, so we don't need to have the curly brackets in there. Likewise as well with the onStop, we don't need to disconnect the client if it's actually been connected, and to do that permission's been granted. So again, I have an option here of just bypassing this particular line of code. So it'll be if permission is granted, and just format that. Okay, so that's basically it. But there may be a situation where the actual user actually denies permission, and then sometime in the future wants to grant permission. Now, obviously, they can, I guess, uninstall the app and then reinstall it, but that's kind of messy. So what we might want to do is just put a kind of a settings button in there, which allows the user to change the options. So this is something I want to quickly do with the layout. So I'm actually just going to add a button in here. So it'll be basically all we need to do is type button, and it'll be wrap content and wrap content. Okay, and what we need to do is just format that button and get it in the right position. So I'll say Android layout. I'm going to put it center horizontal, I think. So that equals to true, and just put it at the bottom as well. And it'll be align parent bottom equal to true. I just need to give it some text. I think we'll just say settings. Okay, so if we just have a quick look at that layout, we should have a little button at the bottom which we just need to deal with now. So let's just deal with this particular button. Okay, so it'll be an appropriate ID for the button. Okay, so that should be that particular problem resolved there. So I'm going to set up an on-click listener for the button. So it'll be just go down here. So it'll be settings button, not set on-click listener, that'll be new on-click listener. Okay, so what I want to do is we need to call the dialog box up again for the user to prompt them to allow the permission. So I'm just going to copy a little bit of the code here. So we'll just nick this. And we'll put that in there. Something's just occurred to me actually. What we need to do, if we're actually dealing with something that's below API 23, we need to allow the app to just simply use the permissions. So what we need to do is actually set put an else in here. It'll be permissions is granted equal to true. So that just caters for the case if we're running below API 23, we just want the permissions to actually work. So we need to put that in below. So just need to find the point where that's that one here. So again, we'll just copy that in there, else permissions equal to true. So that ensures that we can run the app below API 23. But just going back to the, we just need to do a little bit of tidying up with the on-click listener. Okay, so the only other thing I want to do is just change some of the text just to go from a situation where permissions are denied to a situation where permissions are actually granted. So I just need to set the text, so it would be latitude text dot set text, and it'd be true. We need to set the text to latitude, and what I'm going to do is set text longitude. Okay. So that's basically it. So we've now just dealt with a situation where we want to change the permissions from denied to allowed, or even from allowed to denied, with the use of a settings button. The only other thing I want to do, I want to test this on the emulator, so I do need to just change just one aspect of the setup here, and that's to actually make sure we're using the GPS receiver in the emulator. So I need to change from balanced power accuracy to the fine balanced accuracy. So I just need to, I don't ask me why I need to change this, but I'll just do for the emulator to work. So I need to just change that to high accuracy. Okay, so quite a lot going on there, so I'll have a quick recap before we actually do the testing. So we had a situation where we've just called up a dialog box to allow or deny permissions for the location. Irrespective of the response of that, the callback method on permissions result is called. So we need to set up a switching case for each permission, and it will be what we're doing if the permissions are granted. We're just setting up a switch which allows the location updates to happen. If not, that's set to false, and we can actually bypass the location updates. But I've also put some text in here to indicate to the user that we do need to allow the permissions to actually work, and this is why the app isn't functioning properly. So we've got that information there presented to the user. So then I just focused on the onStart method, where we just let the client try and connect to call up the dialog box. And here we've just bypassed the situation if we're denied permissions. We don't request the location updates, and again we don't suspend the location updates if they're not granted either. So we just bypass that. Same, we don't try and disconnect the client if it's never been connected because permission's been denied. Finally, we put a button into the layout. The button was there so that the user could actually change the permission status at some time if they wanted to by means of a button. And so we had set up a non-click listener for that, which pretty much calls the same permissions dialog box up. So that said, I think we're ready to just give this a test on the emulator. I've actually installed the app on the emulator. For this particular emulator, I've actually enabled the ADB integration. Make sure we got that there, because we're going to push some location data to the emulator itself. Also, what you need to do, if you've actually done the basic location services tutorial and loaded test apps on the emulator or on a device, probably good practice to actually uninstall that, because they've already granted the permission, so you're not going to be able to test things properly. So just make sure you've got a clean install when you actually test this particular application. So I'm just going to load up the app now, and you can see it's come up with the dialog box. Allow basic location services to access this device's location. First of all, I'm going to deny it, and you can see that the toast came up there to say that we need to have permissions granted, and there's just a notification here to say, look, longitude, latitude, I've not had the permissions granted. So what I'll do, I'll change this with the settings. You can see it's actually come up with this checkbox here. Now, if the person actually checks that and denies it, then really the only thing they can do is actually deinstall the app if they then want those basic locations services to be working. But obviously, if they do that, you just need to inform the user that you know, those particular services disabled. Now this time, I'm just going to allow the services to go ahead. So what I need to do now is actually I need to pull up some more values here, because I'm actually going to push some locations to the for the emulator itself. Okay. So all I need to do is if I just send that particular location there, just hit the send button. Just take a little bit of time because it's only doing this periodically, and you can see the locations now actually appeared in. So I can just change that. Let's just send a new location. So we're just going to update the location. And you can see that's actually working as desired now. What I'll do, I'll leave this one here for now. Give you a good chance to actually play with that either on the emulator or a good device. You can see it's actually quite an involved topic. So by all means, go and get the code from a website. You've got a good foundation reference to work with there when you actually need to address these particular issues. What I haven't really done is looked at in detail how to handle multiple permissions. I guess that's really for another project, and we'll come to that in the near future. Anyway, I hope you found this one useful. Bye for now.